All right, everybody. Well, today we get into our last part of our statistics unit, and dealing with statistical studies. And this is part one of two parts, which we will talk about in two different videos. So, our job here is to recognize what is the difference between an observation, a survey, and an experiment. So, it says you want to determine a portion or percent of the population that likes French fries. Carefully consider three ways to conduct a study. So the first way, study A, says choose a random sample of people registered to drive in your country and ask them if they like to eat French fries. Study B says choose a random sample of people who are asked to keep a food journal that notes what they ate and at each meal and whether or not they enjoyed what they ate. And C, choose a random sample of people and ask them to eat two different meals. One meal will include a hamburger. The other meal will include a hamburger and French fries. You would collect data on each person's satisfaction with the different meals. So in our first question, it's going to ask us which seems to be the easiest study to conduct. All right, that would be study A. And the reason for study A, it's basically asking a direct question about French fries. What are the disadvantages to each type of study? Well, in study A, there is limited information. You know, they're sampling random people to see if they like French fries. You know, it's not a lot of variety there. B and C is those studies are extremely time consuming. With how they're going to go about conducting those. Okay. What is common with all three samples? What is common with all three studies? And all three studies always start off with choose a random sample of people. So basically, they're all random samples. Okay. So as we get into some definitions here, a blank blank is one in which one or more variables are witnessed with no attempt to affect the outcome. Okay? So when you think about one or two are witnessed, you're watching something. We call this an observational study. Okay? Blank is one type of observational study that involves asking a group of people to respond to a prompt or question. That's a survey. And in a blank, subjects are treated in a certain way to see if the treatment will affect the response. That's an experiment. So it says reread the three studies, then determine if each one represents an observation, study, of survey, or experiment. You should be able to justify why you think so. So if you look back at study A is an observational study. And the reason it's an observational study is it's basically asking a question. It's asking if you like French fries. Pretty simple, right? Study B also happens to be an observational study. And the reason for that is, um, again, you're going to be looking at food journals. And you're not influencing their choices. Okay? They're writing some things down, what they ate at each meal, and whether or not they enjoyed what they ate. Okay? So the observer has nothing to do with it. Study C is an experiment. And it's an experiment because there are two treatments. Okay? Meaning, when we say a treatment, that's kind of like the action that causes response, what they're doing. So one is they're having a meal with a hamburger, and the other they're having a meal with a hamburger and fries. Okay. Okay, a statistical study has 4 steps. First, we ask a question. Then we design a way to collect data. So we have to come up with a plan first. First, we come up with a question, then we come up with a plan to get information for the question. Then we're going to actually collect the data, get the information. And then we're going to analyze the data and arrive at a conclusion. Okay, some statistical studies are designed to specifically determine cause and effect, okay, whether it be positive or negative. So consider this study. In a random sample of students, a school guidance counselor noticed that students who play a musical instrument had better grades than those who do not play an instrument. Okay? So just something the school guidance counselor observed. So this is an example of an observation. She observed them playing right here. Okay, she didn't influence anything. She didn't ask questions. She just influenced. She just noticed that these students played a musical instrument, probably checked them out on their computer to see their grades and noticed that their grades were good. So, just kind of an observation she kind of threw together. Now it says, could the guidance counselor assume that playing an instrument has a cause and effect or some influence on students' grades? Why or why not? Okay, that's going to be no. No cause and effect. And that's because there's other things, right? Grades, could be due to some other factors other than musical instruments. Okay. All right. So it says here, the next little example, the scatter plot shows that people who live longer have more televisions. Does this data produced from a survey prove that having more televisions causes people to live longer? No, that doesn't prove anything. It says, if not, what could be the reason that people who own television, more televisions live longer? Well, there's a lot of factors there. All right, so we're going to say in countries, it's hard to write small. We got this pen here. where people own multiple TVs, they usually have more money. And having more money obviously results in a more developed country. So people have access to better housing, food, and medical care. So the fact that you own more TVs doesn't mean you're going to live longer, but it does mean that you can afford more TVs, and thus being having that kind of money, you can afford to have a good live in a good house, which can help you live longer. Obviously, eat a little bit healthier, which can help you live longer. And of course, if you have access to very good medical care, that can also help you live longer as well. Let me scroll down to here a little bit. So, move this up here. So, does a lurking variable mean that the variable is hiding around the corner? Don't be silly. But what is a lurking variable? A lurking variable is one that causes two variables to have a higher correlation even though there is not a real direct cause. In effect, conclusion that can be drawn from the study. So again, remember, just kind of like it's a variable that comes into play when collecting data that we don't necessarily account for or think of. You might not have thought about, having more TVs kind of gives you a little bit more money. So having those gives you access to these things. So those are things that we might not kind of take into account for. Okay? All right, let's move on. So a researcher wants to determine if smells can affect proficiency at solving puzzles. She asked 10 boys to wear a mask scented with cinnamon to complete a maze puzzle. She asked 10 girls to wear an unscented mask to complete the same puzzle. The average of the girls' times to complete the task was 3 seconds less than the boys. What type of study is this? Well, this is an experiment. Because they are using scents. They're using scent to influence results. Can the researcher conclude that there is a cause and effect relationship between scent and the ability to solve puzzles? Well, there are a few things wrong with this study. Number one, the masks were not assigned randomly between boys and girls. So that could mean, we'll keep this on the same idea. So that could mean that there could be some way to link gender to the ability to solve problems. Okay. Also, the boys knew they were assigned the treatment, being the cinnamon masks. So that could have been a possible distraction. And affected their concentration. So obviously the researcher can't conclude. Okay. All right, so let's get into the summary. So there are two types of studies here. So observational is when you watch and or measures the certain variables without manipulation by the researcher. Where a survey, you are just gathers data by asking questions. Okay, so the survey is kind of in that Venn diagram with the observation because you can do both, but a survey is just that. So what's the disadvantage? Well, there's no cause and effect conclusion that can be made from an observation. The advantage is it's an easier and a faster way to obtain the data. Where experiment compares two treatments. So the disadvantage is it takes longer to do. It's also a little bit more complicated because it's obviously a little bit more detailed. And the advantage, though, you might be able to prove a cause and effect relationship. So we talked about the lurking variable. It's a variable that causes two variables to appear to be highly correlated, even though there is no real direct relationship between the two variables. What constraints are necessary for a statistical study to show a cause and effect relationship? So it must use an experiment, must be free from bias, must have randomly chosen subjects and randomly assigned subjects to treatments. And more about this in future. We're going to learn more about this in future lessons. But when you randomly assign things, you can kind of make a little bit more judgments about it. In terms of free of bias, meaning you're not trying to manipulate the outcome. So in an experiment, what are the subjects, the treatment, and the response? Well, the subject is the part of the experiment that receives the treatment. The treatment is the action that that might cause a response, and that response variable is what happens due to the treatment. And then just to finish it up, statistical results can be unreliable when questions are worded poorly, data is gathered in a non-random way, randomization is not used to properly assign participants to treatment groups, and assumptions are made about populations that are not supported by data. Don't make assumptions. And again, a population is an entire set of subjects in which there is an interest, and a sample is only part of the population from which the data is gathered. All right.